So I guess you should say something about why we did this in the first place.
Right. Well, everyone's talking about it. In 2014, we saw the Gaza war, failed peace talks, and increased settlements. It was a big year for young Jews grappling with the Israel issue. Open Hillel received a ton of attention and fueled controversy for trying to bring non-Zionist voices onto college campuses. Pro-Palestinian author Rashid Khalidi was disinvited from speaking at a Manhattan Jewish day school. And if not now, when? Another youth movement has been protesting occupation along the East Coast.
Call for an end to the operation. The violence must stop.
As the Israeli-Palestinian conflict rages on, the world really questions Israel's actions and its treatment of the Palestinian people. Younger generations of Jews are really looking for answers. I went to Jewish day school. I see my friends and other alumni really struggling with what to think about Israel. As sites where the future Jewish leaders of tomorrow are being cultivated, what Jewish day school students are taught then becomes especially important. We went across the country and interviewed Jewish day school students, rabbis, teachers, thought leaders, to really dig into the way Israel is taught in these Jewish day schools and what it means.
We learned a lot.
We learned a lot. We wanted to learn from Jewish day school participants what their experiences were like firsthand.
My name is Leanne Gale, and I went to Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island from elementary through high school.
Hi, my name is Simone Zimmerman. I went to Jewish day school my entire life, K through 12.
I am Ezra Kurtz. I go to the University of Pennsylvania. I've been going to Jewish day school my whole life.
I'm Talia Stolzenberg Myers. I study history at Barnard, and I went to Jewish day school my whole life. I think that in both latent and less direct ways, there was a very particular sense of how we talk about Israel that was communicated on in the space of our school.
To me, I keep this in mind. When I am talking about Israel, I am speaking about someone's mother. That is the emotional connection. That's the connection that most of my students have. And it is very powerful.
So I think one of the main issues that makes teaching Israel in the classroom so difficult is because people come to the classroom with not only pre-established ideas, but pre-established emotions that they're not willing to easily let go of.
We promote a connection to Israel on an emotional level in many, many ways. In speakers that come in during the celebration of independence, we line the school with Israeli flags.
We did all of the different celebrations, and so I distinctly remember in elementary school, Yom HaAtzmaut was the Israeli Independence Day, was one of my most favorite times of the year because we would all come back to school after a full school day. It would be warm out, we would have this huge barbecue, Israeli dancing, Israeli food. All of the kids who have Israeli parents would be there with their families, and it would be like their moment to shine, and they would be kind of leading the activities, and we would have a great time. And for us, the cultural activities really just made us feel like Israel is a fun place, Israel is a validating place where you can express your Judaism in a fun way that's not just day school, it's not just Torah, it's actually lived experience.
I think that support of Israel or love of Israel definitely expanded beyond the realm of intellectual thought. It was very much so part of the social dynamic of the space. It was the default.
Students who might want to offer a critical perspective are generally not made to feel 100% welcome doing that.
The motto of my high school was inspire and challenge, and obviously the inspiration is more of an educational motto, but the challenge aspect was supposed to be about introducing complexity into things, and I think that complexity is lost when it came to the Israel discussion, when it came to the Israel, almost curriculum, whatever you want to call it, and it was a little bit insulting because we were expected to be challenged in so many other aspects and to think critically about these things, even historical narratives. But when it came to Israel, it wasn't so much of a discussion as much of it was this is what happened and this is why we are so great, and thus this is what needs to happen in the future.
The acceptable discourse was just basically, we love Israel, period.
We met students who felt Israel was taught differently to them than other subjects. It carried a different weight. How did this standard get set?
As no progress is made in peace talks between Israelis and Palestinians, the idea of Israel and Palestine has really moved to the forefront of a lot of international dialogue, which has then increased levels of concern or even anxiety in a lot of day school curricula. So the pro-Palestinian movement has gained some strength over the last few years, which has then increased the desire inside schools for there to be a narrative that really represents Zionism in the best positive light. And so there's really been a broad effort that I've seen across the political spectrum inside the Jewish community to make sure that Israel is taught and spoken about and addressed in the best way possible.
Why do you think the Jewish community as a whole is so tied to this more right-wing Israel as the victim, nationalistic narrative? Why do you think it's so pervasive?
So I wouldn't frame it your way, actually. I would say that the Jewish community is, by virtue of necessity, for the previous decades, has felt that Israel, and there's still many people who feel this way, that Israel is an embattled stakeholder in the region, and that as long as that embattled stakeholder has to fight for its very survival, then we have to take a circle the wagons, present a particular perspective to the world. Advocacy has to be monolithic. We can't open the door to let any of the cracks of light get in that might be, in some way or another, break down that narrative.
I started learning about the war pretty young, and the state of Israel as more or less an outcome of the Holocaust, the importance for us to have a homeland, and that feeling of victimhood and persecution. It's really strong in our education.
So, at the end of World War II, when it came time for the UN to decide what to do with what was then the mandate of Palestine, I think the fact that the Jews had just had a really unfathomable loss certainly influenced their decision to partition Palestine. And when you look at the years 1945, 1947, 1948, and you see certain milestones, I think the only way to kind of look at it is the phoenix rising from the ashes. The Jewish people had arguably the greatest loss that they've ever had and hopefully will ever have, and then moved to their greatest triumph.
I learned my entire life growing up about the history of anti-Semitism, about the Holocaust, and very much Israel was like portrayed as the answer to European anti-Semitism, and it very much was part of my own family history and part of like my communal history. The theme definitely was like, this is our past, and that our past is a history of darkness and persecution and victimhood, and now we have Israel, and Israel is the place that we have to defend and protect, and Israel as the answer to all of those things. And if we don't defend Israel and we don't protect Israel, then what happened in Europe is just going to happen again.
I totally understand the desire to use Israel inside of a day school context in a completely uncritical way, in a patriotic way, with incredible enthusiasm and fervor, as a matter of Jewish pride. You look back at the last 100 years of Jewish history, you have to look at the massive amounts of dislocation from the Great Migration of the 1880s to the 1920s and what that really meant for the Yiddish language and for Jewish tradition, and how much was lost just in the migration and the process of assimilation. And then the First and the Second World War culminating in the Holocaust and the loss of 6 million Jews. And then the establishment of the state, but within 20 years of the state being established, the Six-Day War. And then the Yom Kippur War. And then the Lebanon War. And then the Intifada. And then a series of events in which Israel has never really been able to, if you will, exist in a stable, secure environment. So all of that is background to the notion that for American Jews, first and foremost, and in most mainstream institutions, The idea is to make sure that the Jewish people can survive and thrive. And so a narrative that calls into question, the state of Israel, or a narrative that offers criticism, is a very uncomfortable thing for a lot of American Jews who feel like if we begin to unpeel the layers of the onion, then the whole enterprise might fall apart.
History has clearly influenced the way Israel is taught in many schools. But what does this mean for young adults grappling with an Israel of the 21st century?
Society has shifted around Israel, and Israel has shifted in a number of ways. First of all, Israel is a superpower, and the Jewish narrative hasn't shifted to recognize Israel as a superpower. Years ago, a couple of years ago, I was listening to Netanyahu speak, give his particular perspective on Iran, and he still says, and then like to say that it's 1938, Ahmadinejad is Hitler, and Israel is threatened by an existential threat of Hitler. And as I processed that line of reasoning more, I realized that he's denying Israel's power by making that statement. He's comparing Israel today and Ahmadinejad today with the powerless, stateless Jews of 1938 up against a Western-style despot. And that's not what Ahmadinejad is, and that discounts Israel's status in the world. So that perspective that Netanyahu has is characteristic of a lot of American Jews, this feeling of being an embattled nation that's up against the powerful threats that seek to undermine it.
I had a pretty strong sense that my duty going out into the world was going to be to defend Israel and to be the person who was countering all the lies in the media and to be telling people the truth. But when I think about specifics of the day-to-day in my high school, I don't really think that I don't think we were actually given so much real content about what was actually going on there.
So there was always kind of an expectation that you would be aware of what was happening in Israel, an expectation that you would have a particular view of that, and in light of those expectations, it was a little bit strange that there was no formal background. It's kind of expected that, maybe your family taught you about it, or you just kind of instinctively feel a particular way, so thus you'll react a particular way to the events that are happening.
I think at school we're taught a lot about Israel, but in everything leading up to the establishment, and then what we learn about Israel now is just things about the sites there, and it's not really about what's going on in the country with the people.
It never had any critical engagement with what's happening in Israel right now. Let's contend with, hard facts and figure out how do we address them as Jews, as individuals who are deeply committed to this place. I never heard a word of, never heard the word occupation or the occupied territories.
I just don't know in terms of the hard history and the facts, and if I don't know it, there are plenty of kids in my school who don't know any of it. And it's just hard because I don't think we know enough, and I don't know what enough is.
Instead of getting facts on modern issues, students are given talking points and tools for advocacy.
Things that various, Jewish donors or organizations think are useful for advocacy. Namely, here are the lists of questions that come up and the answers you should give in public about those questions. Why did the refugees leave? Who attacked first in 1967? What are the causes of the Intifada? Why did Israel launch the Lebanon War? There are all these the questions and the proper responses.
We also had in our senior year of high school an Israel seminar, which was intended to prepare us for anti-Israel sentiment on campus. Basically, it was based on Alan Dershowitz's book, The Case for Israel. The way the book is formed is there's an anti-Israel claim at the beginning of every chapter, and then Alan Dershowitz lays out all of the reasons that the claim is false and refutes the claim. So we would have to read the chapter, come into class, the teacher would say the anti-Israel claim, and then we would have to practice refuting it.
The crux of it was, learning how to advocate and defend Israel's actions without really breaking down where those critiques were coming from. Why, when you left the confines of this high school, would you suddenly be contending with these really different, sets of beliefs and a totally different discourse?
I knew all the talking points, I knew to say like, this is what happened in 48 and, the Palestinians or the Arabs, left because they wanted to or because their leaders, lured them away. Like, we definitely did not kick them out. Somehow I knew all of those things getting to campus, and that was because that's what I had been taught somewhere along the way.
We are basically teaching one narrative about Israel, and in the process we might mention other points of view, but we mention them in order to explain why they're wrong, not so that you understand them.
The way this is taught in day schools is the conclusions are the most important, and it's less about the process with which you get there, but more about who you come out on the other side. I mean, in a sense, it's kind of like a product line that these day schools are trying to create a product that's going to be identical in some senses in what they do once they go out into the real world. And in doing so, you wind up actually creating faulty products. So when they get to the real world and see that things are seen by people of all shades to be much more black and white than you've been taught before, you find yourself lost because there's no foundation. You haven't built things up properly, and you've just reached kind of the top layer without the necessary groundwork. And without that groundwork, if you hear something about, well, in 1948 the Palestinians were kicked out of their homeland, you would say, wow, I never heard that before, that's tragic, and you don't know how to actually deal with the claim.
I remember reading this book that I just took out of the library, and I ended up reading some things about Israel that I had never heard about in school. I was reading about the Deir Yassin massacre in 1948, and I was shocked about what I was reading. I was reading about Jewish soldiers actually massacring innocent Palestinian civilians. And I remember doing this research. It was during my winter break in high school, and I was crying hysterically just reading the book. And I was like, I can't believe this happened. It must just be that my teachers at school don't know, because if they knew, they would have told me. So I wrote about this in my paper, and I submitted it, and I didn't get a good grade on my paper. And I was in shock. And I was like, why? What did I do wrong? I did all my research. I did everything I usually do. And I went to the teacher and I said, why didn't I get an A on this? And the teacher said, you gave too much credence to the Palestinian narrative. And at the time, I didn't know what a Palestinian narrative was. I didn't know there was any such thing as a Palestinian narrative. And so hearing that kind of piqued my interest and made me think there's something that I'm missing here. Clearly, if there's a Palestinian narrative, there must be a Jewish narrative. There must be an Israeli narrative. That must be what I'm learning. There's clearly another side.
I was just recently at a conference, and it was for educators, and we were in a breakout group, and we were actually talking about the Kahan Commission. And as we were talking, I asked the question of my group, do you feel that this is appropriate to discuss with your students? And one of the teachers from a local school said, I would not ever talk about this with my students. And we said, why? And she said, because I want them to love Israel the way I love Israel. And it was interesting because there was a young woman there in her 20s, and she looked at the woman, she said, that doesn't work. I went to a school and that's exactly what I experienced, and I left as a senior loving Israel the way you do, and when I went to college, I started hearing things that I had never been exposed to, and for a good long period of time, all I wanted was to hear the Arab point of view.
It makes sense, of course. Jewish day schools have an agenda. They want students to defend Israel once they leave the community.
Educators are concerned that day school students are going to come to college campuses and face a lot of anti-Israel activity, and their answer to that is that we really have to make sure these kids can stick up for Israel and know how to defend Israel. What's really critical is that there is this engagement with Israel that happens way before you get to the advocacy level, so that people have genuine feeling for and a relationship with and are engaged with Israel. You can't really get people defending something unless they have a relationship with it and they want to. And it's, you know, intuitively we know that. You go out on a first date, you say, hi, my name is Fern, this is what's good about me. The issues are going to come later. You don't go and say, hi, my name is Fern, I'm having a fight with my neighbor, let me tell you why you need to stick up for me, because it's not how we operate. But if that happens in the absence of that, you know, real engagement, then you're really asking somebody to stick up for something that, and you haven't built a relationship whereby they'd be prepared to do that. And it's artificial, and it actually is counterproductive. It's a turnoff to people when they're being asked to do something that they don't have that emotional connection to.
The constant pressure from parents. Can you prepare the kids for campus? The straight answer to that is no, I can't. And nor is it necessarily my function. And I can't prepare the kids for campus for a whole long list of reasons, which begin with the fact that these high school students, most of them, have never set foot on a university campus, and therefore they have no idea what the setting is, what the intellectual setting is, what the cultural setting is, and most of all, they don't know what the political setting is, because in our community, Israel is not politicized. Yeah, in our community, Israel is not politicized.
That transition, the one from Jewish day school to college campus, is the flashpoint of the Israel education issue. When students are confronted by a different Israel than the one they've been taught, it can be traumatic.
When they encounter, and they do when they get to the campuses, when they encounter other students, often Muslims or Palestinians, who actually know much more than that kind of thing, but actually know what happened, know the places, know the dates, know the personalities. The Jewish students who come out thinking that they're prepared are embarrassed and quickly start to ask themselves whether it's worth it at all to talk about this topic.
So when I got to Penn, immediately the first classes that I took were Introduction to the Middle East and Arabic, and my motivation was really to figure out what everyone is so upset about. Why is there another side? Why do people hate Israel so much? Why is there all of this anti-Israel sentiment? Is it really anti-Semitism, or is there something else going on? And immediately all of my assumptions were totally turned on their heads. There's a whole history here, and the whole myth that I grew up with that Israel had been a land without a people was just completely thrown out the window, because I realized that this piece of land had been populated for years and years and years. And the minute I started to really love that and love that culture and fall in love with that history, then I was motivated to learn more.
Really, the divestment campaign that took place on Berkeley's campus in spring 2010, which was during my freshman year, kind of eclipses a lot of my memory. The stories that I heard in those meetings are still seared into my memory. You know, my aunts and cousins didn't sleep for weeks as the bombs were falling overhead in Gaza. My shoulder has never been the same since I was beaten at a checkpoint as a little kid. You want to know what racism looks like? Let me tell you what it's like when I try to go visit my family in Jerusalem, when I was born in Jerusalem, and I show up at the airport and I get siphoned off into a room for 6 hours with other people that have dark skin like me. You know, you're sitting there listening to Palestinian students for hours and hours and hours telling their stories. Like, there's only so long that you can say to yourself, like, with any integrity, like, oh, they're all lying. And I remember coming back to the community and like asking, well, I don't understand, I'm hearing these stories that are completely irreconcilable with all of the stories that I had always known about Israel. And those questions were met with like total radio silence.
Those who are most committed to it, they start learning. And when they start learning, I have a huge amount of admiration for them, because they often have to go through a whole process of painful re-examination and sometimes a confrontation with their synagogues, with their families, but there's a lot, I think probably a lot more students who withdraw. Don't necessarily withdraw from the whole Jewish setting, although I think there's a tendency to do that, but they withdraw from an encounter or a willingness to engage with Israel.
I went through a period where I was like, I'm not really going to be a part of this conversation. I'm not interested. I'm just going to take my anger and go focus on something else. I was feeling really betrayed by the Jewish community, and I was wondering why I hadn't learned all of this in school, and I was wondering if it was really just this huge conspiracy to restrict information and to brainwash me into becoming a cog in some kind of political Israel advocacy system and force me to support things publicly that I don't actually support. And I felt really belittled too, because I thought, how easily did my community think I could really be brainwashed? Like, why do they have so little faith in their youth? Did they not think that I could really handle this information?
Unless we as a community, I'm speaking here now of American Jewry as a whole, unless we can make more room for more voices and be open to debate, then it may cause a certain part of the population to just turn away. I think that's a dangerous possibility.
I can't tell you how many times I've had students say to me, I have never, ever been told that Israel has done anything wrong, ever. And that's sad to me. I think we have to understand that the way we have been teaching doesn't serve our students. It makes them naive and it sets them up when they get to college.
Students, like young American Jews on a larger scale, are continuing to ask these questions and continuing to find that they want to know more about Israel, that they are upset about the occupation. The fact that so many mainstream institutions are still kind of like refusing to engage them, or are really like hesitant to open their doors to a much more critical, nuanced discourse, it definitely begs the question, like, is the real Israel, so terrible that we can't bear to look? Is the reality so disturbing and so beyond repair that we can't bear to let our students engage with it? And I don't think that's I don't think that's an answer that we want to be giving our kids.